Good evening. I know it's been a little while since I made a video last. Really haven't had much to do to the Corvette. I've been working on a lot of different other projects, including my pickup, which there's other videos on my channel for that. But tonight, I already have the car jacked up. I'm going to be installing a rear transmission, we'll call it brace or actually transmission mount. So we'll get into the install, explain which one I bought, why, where I got it from, and then I'll show the installation, or the removal of the old one, and then the installation of the new one, and then probably some thoughts afterwards. So stay tuned. The rear transmission mount that I ended up purchasing, I bought this particular one off of eBay. I think it was about $200 or $215 shipped. It's from this HPI company. It comes with this like brace unit, which is machined aluminum. It has two little support features on either side. They basically feel like hockey pucks, so it's a high diameter like rubber composite material. It comes with the bushing for the center, which has the metal insert, and then the urethane inserts at both ends. That goes in there together like that. It comes with a bent channel. I'm not sure what the thickness is. I probably should have measured that. But anyway, it's either painted, powder coated, whatever. Has the two studs for the bottom mount. It comes with the 3 bolts, one for the center section there that goes into the lower mount, and then the 2 bolts that go up through the the bottom of the cross member, these bolts go through the bottom of the mount and then into the actual transmission housing itself, and then 2 nuts for the 2 stud features that are on the center section of the mount. I bought this particular mount just because of the price. I mean, it's basically the same as the other ones that are offered for double. It doesn't have the nice, openings and machined out pocketry or geometry of the some of the other ones for the $400 or $500. But essentially, if it does the same thing, it's not that much more in weight. Doesn't really matter to me. I just want the support for the transmission and to eliminate that, whatever you want to call it, wheel hop or drivetrain hopping that happens when you really launch pretty hard. That's really the purpose of it. And of course, I got some midnight oil right there to help me through this, because I have been at work all day. But yeah, so I'll get through the removal, and then we'll get into the installation, and then the afterthoughts of the whole thing. The tools I ended up using for this entire install, I used my electric impact to get the 18mm nuts off the bottom, and I used a 5/8 wrench, a 13mm ratcheting wrench, a 15mm ratcheting wrench, 18mm socket, 1/2" drive ratchet, adjustable 3/8 drive ratchet with a 13/16 socket. It's actually a spark plug socket that worked perfect. A small little pry bar, the hacksaw, and flathead. And that basically is everything I used. Drill bit and the drill. And I think that's pretty much it. But yeah, that's basically everything you're going to need to do the install, other than a jack and the stands and little ramps if you have those. Okay, first things first, I'm going to try to do this the best I can, just because the lighting that's in the garage and it's pretty dark. But I do have my LED light on, work light on, and the flashlight. So there's a couple bolts you have to remove. So the first 2 obvious ones are below here, and those are the studs that are protruding into the mount above. So you have to remove these 2 bolts, or 2 nuts I should say, and then the other 2 you have to focus on. One is right there, so that goes into the differential case there, And then obviously there's one on the other side, which I gotta move this out of the way. And so you can see right there, through there. So you'll take those 4 out. And this looks like a riveted stud basically in the center section of the mount. So that will just stay in there. And then I'm going to have to jack the actual transmission or differential case up a little bit, I think, to be able to remove the whole mount. And hopefully I don't have to take the main 4 subframe bolts or the nuts off and drop the whole subframe out, because that would kind of suck. But if I have to, I'll take them down a little bit to get a little bit more clearance, push the diff up a little bit more, and then be able to remove the mount entirely. And obviously my differential's a little bit dirty. I think I have a little bit of a leak at the case, particularly right where you can see better on this side. Oops. Let's see if we can get this here. Particularly right at the, oh boy, shadows are killing me here. Yeah, right where the flange is. You can see that, but I think on the other side, right where this flange, the flange for the differential meets the actual case, I think it's leaking out of there and then causing it to kind of mist all over the place and get all this grime build up. But I'm not really worried about that until something else happens and I have to either drop the whole torque tube or the diff out, or maybe I'll just work on that over the winter too, because I won't have anything better to do, I guess. But that's where I'm at right now. So I'm going to start getting the size wrenches and things together so I can start taking some of these bolts out, and we'll come back to removing it. So the first thing I'm doing, I'm taking these 2 nuts off the studs. I'm just using electric impact. They came right out, but basically you want to use an 18. I use a little shorty to get a little bit more room, but just blast them off. I already started this, by the way. I'm just doing this for sake of showing it. But take those out, and basically the mount's not going to go anywhere because the studs are there, as well as the mount is sitting on this aluminum cross brace structure. So the differential is not going to move. Once you get those out, then I'm going to actually start jacking the diff up to be able to get the other bolts out in the top section. So we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so for taking these bolts out, using a 15 for the stock bolt, and when I check the new bolt for the new mount, it seems to be a 16 or a 5/8, depending on what socket or ratchet set you have. So for this particular one, I'm using a ratcheting wrench here. It does have a slight angle to it. To initially get the bolt loose, again, the one we're talking about, I'm going to stick this thing is right here. So to initially get it loose, I use the open end, which would be this end, because you don't really have enough room on the bolt head. It looks like you do, but you barely have enough to actually get the wrench on to get some good leverage. But they're not super, well, mine weren't super tight, but you start putting that, you get that on there, and then just loosen it up. And then, so to get it all the way off, I'm going to end up using the ratcheting portion of this, kind of stick this in here like that, and you can kind of move the brake line. Everything's going to be fine. It's not going to damage anything. And then just move the loom out of the way, and then you kind of just go to town, get that bolt out, and then we'll go to the other side, and we'll share the secret sauce for that one too. Okay, so once you get this to a certain amount out, you can actually reach in from both the front and the back of where the bolt is, and you're able to, you can start twisting it by hand. And obviously most of these Corvettes have low miles and have been garage kept through the winter, so none of the bolts should really be pretty crapped up. But you can take this out by hand, which I'll do here in front of you, and it'll drop out, and you can actually get the bolt out between the frame and the mount itself, which is good, because I was a little nervous that the bolt was going to be too long. But then it's out, and then you can move to the other side. So just like the other side, I used the open end of the wrench to crack the bolt, just because there's not a whole lot of room there when you first get going for the bolt head and the wrench to interfere to create a really good seal, so to speak, to be able to put some torque on it. But then once you get it, you can use the open end, and I kind of have the bent side of the ratchet or the wrench like that. And then obviously, like I had mentioned on the other side, they are, once you crack it loose, it really is pretty loose, and you can kind of get in there by hand and just undo it. And I imagine this one's going to fall out just like the other one. And then basically the differential there will be just boltless and just suspended by the mount. And then I'll videotape jacking it up. There's not a whole lot of room at the top, like I said, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to get the mount out. I might actually have to cut the studs down here at the bottom slightly shorter, put the nut on, just cut the stud off, and just leave enough that I can pop it out. But we'll see what happens. Okay, so this is a lot easier than I thought. So basically, if you can see here, I put the jack with a piece of wood right at where your exhaust flanges would be. So basically there's like a center section of where the differential basically meets the transmission case. I'll call it that for lack of better terms at this point. You can see there's, oh, the light. You can see that's where like the trans or diff cooling fins are there. So it's like right in front of that, right in front of your leaf spring there. So I pushed up, I kept jacking. I just made sure that those brake lines were out of the way and they weren't going to get smushed. And you can see that the diff cover is pretty close to the composite flooring there of the car. But essentially, you just have to move the loom kind of out of the way. Your brake lines are a little bit flexible, so you can kind of bend on them a little bit if you need to. But basically, you're just going to tilt the mount backwards and then kind of walk it out where the loom is, and you get it all the way out. And you can kind of drop it on the floor there. But you have a giant big hole there now for the new mount to go in. So we'll get to putting that in next, and we'll continue on the installation portion of this. This is actually a lot easier than I thought. But old one's out. Doesn't seem to show much signs of wear or cracking, I guess, but it does look a little deformed, deflated kind of in the middle. I have not seen a brand new stock one, so I'm not exactly sure what it looks like. So that's the stock mount. Obviously mine's a little grimy. I think it's because, like I said before, that fluid is kind of seeping from the flange cover, and I'll have to do that over the winter or whatever. But yeah, old one's out, so new one's gonna go in, and we'll show that once I get it placed. Okay, I thought this would be beneficial to show. So if anybody's wondering how in the heck do you get this big long bar piece in there, so basically what I did was I came in here between the brake lines, and you can kind of get it stuffed in way far into the see if I can get a good picture of this here. So you can get it stuffed in pretty far into that subframe, and then, sorry, lots of repositioning of the lights here tonight. So once you get it into that subframe, you can get the other end in behind the loom. So you're gonna have to pull this loom back just a little bit to kind of push it down under the loom and in. But once you get it, you can kind of slide it over to where your pin's gonna line up. And then, fortunately, there's enough slop in these holes, you can move this around. So what I'm gonna end up doing is tilting this thing forward and then pushing the base plate forward like that, and then sliding the top part of the mount in. And then actually from both sides, you can access the bolt that's going to go through there, which is the one they provide you, which is this big one. And I'm actually going to put the bolt side, the head, on the towards the front of the car, and then the nut side on the back. Not that it really matters, but that's the way I'm going to do it. So once I get this thing positioned, I'll start the video up again, just because I don't have a means to keep the camera where you guys can all see it. But we're back. Sorry, some clanking. So it seemed as though the brace kind of gets really close to the counterweight thing here, the vibration damper, and it also gets really close to this wire loom. So I tried to look up some information regarding where these looms go, or if they get left there and while the brace is installed, etc. But needless to say, I didn't find that much information, but I also didn't look that hard either. But so anyway, I wanted to show this connector because there is a connector that kind of goes through the aluminum structure here that holds this loom in place, so you can kind of move this out of the way. Basically, you can spin it so that you can see the front end, and all you have to do is take a screwdriver and stick it in there and pry it, and the two ends will pop apart, so you can easily move the loom out of the way. And I've never really understood, I mean, obviously there's a point for that damper up there, otherwise the engineers wouldn't have put it there. I personally don't know what it really does. I've seen that on a lot of transmissions. Actually, the transmission in my truck also had a rubber like counterweight vibration damper as well. In the pictures of the installation of this particular brace, it looks like it's removed. So I'm going to remove this bracket here and just put that to the side. I think the brace will clear it, but I am kind of concerned that if it hits it, is it going to cause excess vibration, etc., and really just bother me, and I'm going to be redoing this anyway, so I think I'm just going to remove it, and we'll see what happens. So that's the update, and it also looks like this brake line is going to get really close to where that cross member piece kind of sits. So I don't know if I'm going to have to take this and move this out of its own connector as well and push the line out of the way, or if I can kind of flatten this out a little bit and then it'll go underneath the actual arch in the brace. And once I get this thing back in here, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. Damper removed. You have a giant hole in there now, and should be plenty of room. And if you want to know what it looks like, basically that's it. There's a cast like steel piece on this side. This other piece, I guess that's metal too. It felt really weird. Like it didn't sound like metal, but anyway, it's like a counterweight, and then it's got two bolt holes, one in the top, one in the bottom. Basically it sits in there like that, and then there's these two. You need a 13 to take them out, and I ended up using the ratchet wrench again. You can kind of get it in there and you know, get the top one here like that, and then from the bottom side you can get the bottom one. But it looks like you're gonna have to remove that to install this brace. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that and put this bar back in and see how it looks. Okay, so this is kind of what I was talking about before, where the brace is gonna be really close to the brake line, and I've already tried to really push it down. Let's see if I can get to a better angle here. Really tried to push it down, but it is like really close. And the other thing, if you take the brake line out of there, there's a little plastic clip, if you can see a little further down, that holds the line into place where it's supposed to be, because it is a hard line. It looks like that little hockey puck or foot that they put on the brace it just runs into that plastic brake line holder. So I don't really want to take the brake line out because I like it secured in there. So what I might end up doing is shaving that hockey puck thing down just slightly so that it clears that little brake plastic piece, and then see how close it is relative to the actual line itself. But on both sides it's kind of the same deal. This side's a little bit better. Obviously it's not bolted in yet, so things will probably get tighter as I tighten everything up. While I put this in and it's sitting in here, I also checked where that counterweight is, and or damper, whatever it actually is used for. But that that definitely lays right on top of that brace piece right here. So that's going to be a problem, so you won't be able to use that either. So anyway, I guess that's what you get for 200 bucks sometimes. You gotta do a little bit of work, but you save a couple $100. I don't know that it's actually worth it. As I've gotten older, I really appreciate like solid engineering and thinking about all the things that go into it. And if it bolts in like it's supposed to on the first try, then the engineers or whoever designed it, doesn't have to be an engineer, but they actually thought about everything and did a good job. Stuff like this kind of just boils my blood a little bit, but again, I paid half the price for this thing, so that's kind of what I expected. But anyway, continue on. Okay, so what I ended up doing is I had this thing laying in the cradle with the bolt hole lined up and marked it on either side where the where those little brake line holders are, and then kind of triangulated it and just made a guesstimate of how thick. Basically, you can see the material's gone there anyway because the bolts that hold that foot on. So I'm gonna go ahead and just cut a little piece of that out and triangulate it just so that it clears that plastic mount, and I don't actually have to remove the brake line from the holder. So we'll see how that looks in a second. Okay, so cutting the little rubber feet seems to be a grand idea in that it fits right in there. I triangulated it. It looks really good. It kind of sits in there like it probably should have. I just used a little hacksaw, and it was really super easy to cut through. It does feel like hockey puck material, but now that I have that all cut, I'm going to go ahead and put the bolts back in and see where this thing sits, and then I'll make a final assessment of the brake lines, try and maybe bend them just slightly and see if I can get them to clear, and that's where the next part of the video will start. Okay, so one little tip to get these new bolts in, because they are longer, so you can't necessarily get them in while the differential's up, and because the brace is thicker here, you can't slide the bolt in. So what I did is I used the nuts that came with it just to captivate the bolt while I slid it in. And with the diff jacked up, you actually have enough room to have the nut underneath. So once you get it in there, you can go ahead and take the nut back off and then push the mount up and then get the new bolt started without the bolt dropping out on you every single time you go try and lift it up. The next modification to make this thing fit, I had to use a drill bit, drill out the holes on both sides a little bit to get the bolts through. Because no matter what I tried to get the bolt into the actual member of the differential case, one went in, the other one wouldn't go in. The other one went in, the other one wouldn't go in. So basically I just punched them out just slightly to accommodate, give the bolt a little bit of wiggle just to be able to line them up. And then when I look at the stock, I looked at the stock mount basically and said, okay, what size drill bit? This one basically is as tight as the stock hole, so I figured I'd just drill it out, make it work. So we'll see what happens in a second, if I can get the member in or not. If not, I might just end up putting the stock thing back together, calling it a day, and finding a different mount. But anyway, we'll see what happens. Okay, so blowing out the holes like I did, I was able to get both sides in. But if you guys remember when I first started this, I talked about how there's minimal height of the nut to put the wrench on. Well, let me tell you, this is even worse. So for those of you, or if the manufacturer is watching, oh, you forgot to put the washer under the bolt. The washer's under there. So you probably need multiple washers to really get the bolt head to stick out far enough that you can actually get a wrench on it and really tighten it. Fortunately, I was able to do it. I used a 5/8 because I didn't have a 16. But you kind of have to hold your hand under the bolt head and then try and turn it at the same time. And usually those end up in knuckle busters. So yeah, just as a heads up, if you're going to do that, you might want to use 2 washers if you're going to use this. And you're probably going to have to drill out the hole a little bit just to fit it. Just some other nuances with this HPI mount. Finally got this thing all buttoned up. I didn't really have a good stand for the camera, so I couldn't take a whole video of all the struggle that I just went through, but nonetheless, I kept the brake lines in the same spot. What I ended up doing was I just kind of bent them, as you can see, just pushed on them a little bit on either side. They're both like that, so they both clear that cross member. The factory wiring loom still goes in through the same carrier there, as well as the one through that side. You can see that. It is tight though on this side because it goes underneath the actual trans brace. You know, it's not going to rub through because it has the casing and there's still space in between, but it definitely is a little bit tighter than going outside like the other side. Then so once you get everything all in, I put the big main bolt through for the actual mount, and then I used a 13/16 for the outside bolt head, and then just an adjustable on the inside just because it was easier to access, and then tighten that up. And then once you're done tightening those, this mount, which is kind of nice, is I could use the factory nuts. I like the nuts better because, that sounds real bad, but because they're flanged, whereas the other ones are not flanged. And generally I just like to use the factory hardware versus aftermarket stuff anyway. So now that it's all in, everything looks like it clears properly now that I've bent the lines and cut the actual rubber mount. You can see how it fits right around the brake line holder. That is pretty much touching the brake line holder, but it's not going to crush the brake line, so that'll be okay there. And everything else seems to be all snugged up tight and fit okay after that. So after those couple snafus, we'll see how this mount actually behaves, and hopefully it works out pretty well. I'm going to end up zip tying this loom just to the brake line here, just to kind of hold it, make sure it doesn't flop around, and then I'll get the car off the jack stands. So that's next. So the trans mount is finally installed. I just went for a ride. The initial startup, I definitely noticed a slight more vibration, but I wouldn't say it's anything crazy. And then definitely while driving, there is slight more vibration. I mean, it's a different tone than the stock mount. But definitely in downshifting, acceleration, letting off the throttle, I think I achieved what I wanted to achieve with the mount. Generally, when I would let off the throttle, I mean, my car only has 24,000 miles on it now, but when I let off the throttle, I could feel the whole car kind of like rock and almost become off balance. And especially like if I slow downshift and not really rev match, and I'm just kind of like, you know, moping around, I could definitely feel like the whole drivetrain shake a little more, and the mount seems to have eliminated that or alleviated that. And then it's pretty chilly out tonight in PA, so I did like a 1, 2, 3, 4 pull, and in first gear the drivetrain hop / wheel hop seems to definitely have been subdued. So I guess that's really what I wanted out of the car, or out of the mount anyway. So I guess I'm pretty happy with it. It was a good, I guess, $200. Although you have to do some modification. I think if you're looking for a budget friendly, and you don't mind spending a couple extra hours or minutes modifying some things to get something to work, that HPI trans mount is really not a bad move, I guess. And just in recap for what you have to do, you have to drill. I had to drill out the holes that the bolts go through to then mount to the differential case or housing. I had to cut we'll call them the anchor feet down slightly, just so that they clear the brake line bracket. Let's see what else. Those were really the two major things. And then alongside the bolt heads, you have to make sure that you either shim the bolt head out a little bit that goes into that differential case with a washer, or otherwise you're really going to struggle trying to tighten everything up. It's just going to take you an extra couple minutes. I think overall, between jacking the car up, taking clips of this for this video, and then getting it off the stands, it was probably like 3.5 hours. And if everything just bolted up, it probably would have been like a 15-minute job. So it really depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking to just fart around in the garage for the afternoon or the night like I do, then it's not that bad of a mount. If you want to just set it, forget it, kind of just put it in and not do any work, this mount is obviously not going to be for you. But I only drove it like 10 miles, so we'll see how it holds up over time, and if I have to redo another video based on the wear or something like that, I'll do that. But everything still seems to be in the position where I left it. The brake lines don't hit. The wire looms don't seem to be moved or chafed. So everything there seems to be good. Yeah, overall, not a bad $200. Thanks for watching.